Good afternoon, and welcome to the Department of Medicine's Grand Rounds. Please take a moment to silence your pagers and mobile devices. Next week will be Neurology Grand Rounds with Dr. Beth Hopkins. Grand Rounds today is a joint Department of Medicine and Institute for Clinical and Translational Research lecture with Dr. Daniel Ernest Ford. Dr. Ford completed his MD at SUNY Buffalo School of Medicine. He then pursued internal medicine residency and fellowship at Johns Hopkins University. He's currently professor of medicine at the Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine and holds joint appointments in psychiatry, behavioral sciences, and the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health in Health Policy and Management and in Epidemiology. He serves as the director of the Institute for Clinical and Translational Research and is the Vice Dean for Clinical Investigation at Johns Hopkins School of Medicine. Dr. Ford's research focuses on understanding the relationships between depression and chronic medical conditions and how to improve care for patients with medical comorbidities. He's one of the first investigators to publish data documenting depression as the risk for myocardial infarction and stroke. He also has an interest in how to utilize information technology to improve care of patients with depression and tobacco use. His work has been published in a number of leading journals such as Translational Behavioral Medicine, American Journal of Preventive Medicine, and Circulation. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Davis to the podium.
Thank you, and welcome to an extra special Medicine Grand Rounds and ICTA research seminar. We're just absolutely delighted that Dr. Ford can make the journey over from the other side of Baltimore to give out the seminar today. So Dan runs his ICTA, so we have our ICTA, and that's no coincidence. And Dan and I also joined at the hip on the CTSA game, which is a lot of fun, especially when you get funded. So with no further ado, I want to introduce Dan, and I'm also delighted to see colleagues from not just the School of Medicine, but from the other 6 professional schools at UMB. Thank you for joining us today.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to, this is not in some ways the usual Grand Rounds. I want you to kind of think a little bit step higher about this concept about, are we conducting research in a way that is getting us the outcomes that we like? And for those of you that are, more on the clinical side than on the research side, there's no doubt that the clinicians are the group that both help identify the research questions, get patients to join the studies, and if nothing else, care for the patients while they're in clinical trials, and then are really the consumers of that information, right? And that's where we see each one of those steps where there's some barriers that we'd like to look at. So again, I want you to think pretty high up, and then we'll get a chance for some questions at the end. So I thought I would just look a little, at the end of the day, what are we really interested in? Life expectancy would be one. And I could show you this with quality of life, and it'd be the same thing. And, what I'm going to tell you is that, yeah, the United States, we're doing well. We're improving life expectancy. But boy, if you look at what's happening around the world, we shouldn't be complacent at all, right? So this is what we look at for life expectancy. And if we ever think it's genetic, it's hard to imagine. We've got South Korea, France, Japan, Switzerland, Australia, Canada, all with projecting some increases in life expectancy that are certainly, beyond what we're achieving. And, this is another one that I saw which was interesting. If you look going up to about 1980, we were pretty much in line with these other countries in terms of life expectancy, and it has not been a good trend in the last 30 years. And I won't even show you all the graphs we usually do with saying that the United States spends more than anybody else. on healthcare, and we still don't achieve these outcomes. And for those of you who think, certainly part of it is this, what we call health disparities. But if I showed you this for, white Americans, I'm not saying that that's all it, not education, you're still going to see we're not doing as well. And I would, just driving in, we all had our election day, goggles on, trying to think. But remind me, what did Americans say was their number one concern going to the polls? Healthcare. So I don't think we should be, and I said, well, we all feel like, and I could list all the great achievements that have happened in the last 10 years where, I think clinical research has done a great job, immunotherapy, hepatitis C. So there's a feeling that we are improving. It's just that I don't think we should be complacent because we are not meeting our full potential in terms of what we can achieve. And, some of it's on the population side that they're, with their risk factors, but you can't ignore the health community in terms of our responsibility in this as well. So what is translational research? Because I think we want to try to see if we're on the same page. And you might look at this. So the process of turning observations in the laboratory, clinic, and community into interventions that improve the health of the individuals and the public. And there are several categories, really: diagnostic, therapeutics, medical procedures, and behavioral changes. And you might say, well, everybody does translational research, do they? And I'll just say we've done surveys of Hopkins faculty, and others have, and just to give you some context with it. If you're a faculty member in engineering, they say, what's all we do is translational research. Like, I don't even understand how to answer the question. We are problem solvers. That's what we do. If you look in clinical, people that do clinical research, they're pretty much all going to say they focus on translation. For us, if you look at laboratory-based scientists, about 50% say they do translational, and another 50% say this is not in my area. And then, NCATS, which is the National Center for Advancing Translational Science, was developed within the NIH more to focus on this. So it is the field of investigation focused on understanding the scientific and operational principles underlying each step of the translational process. It's basically saying this doesn't happen by magic. You don't have something that happens in the lab and all of a sudden, you get improved health. That you have to really understand each one of the steps, and there are some general principles that are found to be important in this science. So this is, one of several translational research pathways you will see. Basic science, how does it work? Translational research, can it be studied in people? Efficacy studies, and then outcomes and effectiveness research. This is kind of the classic pathway, and it makes it look very linear. And in fact, it's kind of been replaced with something more like this, saying that there are interconnections between all of those. And in fact, one of the great things that academic centers should be doing is this back translation. We tried a therapy in a clinical trial. It only worked in some people, not in others. Let's go back to our lab colleagues and say, can you help us understand what was the mechanism? Why did it work in some and not the other? And so you see much more this circular approach with the patient in the middle, and you see starting with basic research and going around that circle, but you see much more interconnections between the different phases. And that's how we prefer to think about it. I can tell you there have been several attempts to really measure this translational process and efficiency, and what you find is it's, that's kind of that basic science to improving health kind of works best in the drug development side, but if you look at diagnostics and others, it's usually not this straight linear process. So what are some of the tools for translational research that we think about that need to be incorporated into successful translational research teams? And I'm going to talk about a few of these. So the one would be problem-based discovery, and again, I'll describe each one of these a little bit more. Stretching research teams into the next phase of translation, and that's part of it. Like, we're trying to say you're always thinking about the next phase. So if you're a lab-based person, you're trying to think, what's a target that would really make sense for the next therapeutic? If you're doing the clinical trial, you're already trying to think about what's the implementation of the results of that clinical trial. And that's kind of there are some people that like to stretch, and there are other people that like to stay in the narrow area where they feel successful. I don't do that stuff. I'm going back to the lab. You have to recognize that people have a different approach. I will say, in general, again, we've found through some surveys at Hopkins and nationally that senior researchers, it's a cross-sectional study. Senior researchers more likely want to be translational than junior investigators. And hopefully that reflects the maturation of a career and not the fact that things are getting so specialized that the younger investigators say, I'll never see the big picture. I just want to focus on my slice. We believe it's a maturation of a career. You start, you develop narrow expertise, you're good at it, you begin to find, I know how to get a grant, I know how to get a study done, but I want to have bigger impact. I want to leave when I'm done with my career, I want to know that I had an impact, and I'm willing to do some stretching to make that happen. Expertise in regulatory pathways. It's the reality of how the United States works, and certainly in drug development, and that stymies. There are certainly lab-based scientists that would say, no way do I ever want to have an IND. I don't understand that. In fact, that can be where I have to say, we don't call it ICTR because we think that sounded kind of icky. So we call it the ICTR. So we could do it, but I'll just use ICTR more than ICTR. So the ICTR, we've had that situation where a lab-based science, this is good. I have no interest in doing an IND. Isn't there somebody in the institute that could do that process for me? And that's something we have to think about. Commercialization of discoveries as an option, and I'll talk a little bit about that. Engagement with the community patients and clinicians. And finally, this focus on efficiency and the quality of the process. I mean, I don't know about you, I get a little sick of going to meetings and always hearing it takes 17 years from a discovery to get into practice. It was one study done a while ago. I don't know that reflects, it is a long time. I don't think it's always 17 years. But still, we need to always focus on that issue of making the process go as fast as possible. And when you talk to patients, certainly the patients that are encountering a disease in themselves or a family member that does not have any treatment alternative, their entire view is around speed, and they're in some ways willing to sacrifice some other components to make sure that speed occurs. So this first point, focus on the problem. And again, I think this is where you can, one of the things we try to do in the ICTR is learn from other fields. And I think engineering does bring a different perspective to this that we should consider. Biodesign, as modeled by engineering, they take as much time defining the problem as they do in developing the solution. And we tend to go right to a solution. This intervention is easy, it makes sense. We don't even know if anybody really wants it or if it was a problem that was important enough that people would actually change their practice to do it. So we have one of these programs, and I think Maryland has well, where almost for 6 months, clinicians and engineering spend time in the hospital watching whatever happens in surgery, the output, defining the problem, and then working backwards. You define the problem and you say, what could we do to do that? That's not usually the way we tend to think as much in medicine. There's some of that. We tend to say, oh, I have an intervention that works. Maybe I'll try it in this disease, or I'll try it in that disease, or try it in another. And so we're encouraging some incorporation of this approach. We do use this word of team science now. Clearly, translation is a team sport. And we've said this before, very rarely does someone on their own make a discovery, go all the way through. And it's now saying, well, what is a real multidisciplinary team? What is an effective multidisciplinary team? Oftentimes multiple disciplines beyond medicine, but another way to think about it is team with expertise across the translational spectrum. So my team includes people from lab and early clinical trials and effectiveness and thinking it through. And clearly including all stakeholders is another part of this, early in the process. The people that are going to use your research, right? And you look, is it patients, is it clinicians, is it payers, on how to do that? The NCI actually is the only institute that I know has a little center on team science, and Kara Hall is one. We've had her down. You'll see her in some of the CTSAs. They do, some interesting work from the business field. Business has been very interested in effective teams for some time. And so there's a group in the business school at Northwestern that looks at who's on papers and what is a high impact publication. And you find some interesting, first of all, they found that the highest impact journals include scientists from high intensity research institutions and low intensity. They're the most effective. If they're all low, it's not a high impact paper. But if they're all high, it's also, because a beauty is finding that investigator who's very motivated and not in the right environment that necessarily helps them. And all of a sudden you bring them part of the team and they contribute in a great way. And the NIH has looked at that. Another one that they have looked at is the team in terms of the composition and how fresh it is. And showing that you need stability of a team, you need a certain number of people that always work together. But if the same people are still working on the same paper after 5 years, 6 years, all of a sudden the impact starts to drift down. You have to continue to include new people as well as having a stable team. So we think it's an important part to consider. This would be just, if you look at this, we did a look at Hopkins. We did a random selection of publications from 2005, 2010, and 2015, and whether they were interdisciplinary by some standard bibliometric measures. And the first two, so in 2005 and 2010, it was 38% interdisciplinary. In 2015, it was 54%. And now we've actually gone back to the authors and saying, because I must say those broad indices of interdisciplinary are hard to interpret. They actually, in most cases, believe they're even more interdisciplinary than what we said based on the categorization of the authors. And this is partly, certainly this passing of the translational baton. And we're going to talk about that, whether it's commercialization or others, but the time from saying, I think I have a drug target, to let's make it a target, to how long does it take to get the first clinical trial done, all of these. And, I have to say, it's the difference between the company commercial perspective and the academic perspective. The commercial perspective are always thinking about passing the baton and how they get that team together. And I think any of us that work in academic centers realize it's much more haphazard the way we do it. And there's this argument, do academic health centers support team sciences? And I have to say that first one, do universities recognize teams or individual investigators? And I bet you if you look at most of your awards, they're much more to individuals than they are to teams. And I think, as Steve, we've thought about it, we're ready to do it. We're going to do an ICTR Team Science Award. There may be some. I know the ACR, the Cancer Research, ACR gives a Team Science Award out. But how do we recognize those good teams, and how do good teams teach others how they've been effective? Do essential complementary researchers get recognized as in promoted? For us, you look at biostatisticians or people that run lab cores, all of the people that we believe are essential to this process, yet they tend to, to sometimes not get promoted because of our focus on individual recognition. And then, are universities patient enough to allow multidisciplinary teams to mature? Again, that NIH office, they did a look at individual R01s versus the larger multidisciplinary grants. The larger multidisciplinary grants take longer to come up with their publications. But if you go like at 5, 6, 7 years, they have higher impact publications. They've done a better job being junior investigators than the single R01. But it's a patience. I mean, it's going to take you 5, 6, 7 years for those teams to mature and be productive. And then, do universities provide training in how to make teams high functioning? We're trying. We've done this. I thought we actually had a colleague in the business school who had done his doctoral dissertation about how do teams respond to failure. I said, oh, that's a perfect one for that is the life of a research team, right? We put in a grant, it doesn't get funded. Now what does the team do? Do they disappear? Do they find out that sticky issue about, well, we need to replace this part of the team to make it more productive? It's not an easy conversation, and my guess is we could all do it a little better. Regulatory science, developing the framework for balancing protection of humans with efficient advancement of innovation. That's what we're trying to do in regulatory science. I just point out a few of these where I think we in our ICTR are trying to give special help to the team. Support for INDs, managing conflicts of interest, and that'll get to my next issue about commercialization, support for the single IRB policy that's happening, oversight of machine learning, artificial intelligence innovations, where the framework just isn't there, and we were part of the group that developed it, and more focused on some risk-based monitoring approaches, still keeping the focus on patient, and also this focus on transparency of results, that we believe that the CTSAs and I think the NIH sees that one of our roles, for example, is in clinicaltrials.gov. Are we meeting our obligations to report results in clinicaltrials.gov? And I point this out that, again, when you're trying to talk about trust in science by outside, watchful eyes, this is a group that is looking at the reporting of clinical trial results on time in each industry and academic, and if I looked in those purple, I could tell you which one is Hopkins, and I would hit it, and it would tell us exactly what now we believe their data is a little old, but anyhow, everybody can go on there and look and see how we're doing compared to our obligation of doing clinical trials report. And again, it's not easy for individual teams to figure this out. We believe they need some central help to make it efficient and easy for them. Now I want to just talk a little bit about commercialization, because that is also a big part of the translational pathway. And I may be, I hope you don't, I'm going to talk about it in a way where I might want to be more cautious about it, because I think the balance is always on the other side. So I believe we need to figure this out. So what is the purpose and how does it relate to the mission of the university? Yes, we can commercialize, but have we all made sure? And I think we use these global terms about, the university's role is to improve knowledge and implement it, and this is one pathway to do it. But there are also reasons about openness of data and results that conflict, I think, with the commercialization pathway. And then I would put it at the end, is this the best use of the faculty members' time and expertise? There's a lot of faculty spending a lot of time on startups and thinking that they're going to take this, whatever their product is, which they've invested their sweat and tears in. I mean, I've had one. It was commercialized. I lost total control over it. It was a total waste of my time. So there may be part of why I see it. But let me give you a little bit other way. These are definitely benefits of commercialization, right? important path for innovations to broadly reach the population and improve health. It does bring in other source of funding to support research. And I do think encourage faculty to learn about the market and how to create innovations that will more rapidly improve health. I do think that faculty that get into the commercial space, when they talk about problem-based, or they say, yeah, you know what, maybe my intervention doesn't have as great a commercial potential as I thought, because actually it turns out there's 5 other people that have already done this. So it does make them better translational research, but it definitely has a cost in their time to do that. I do point this out. This is I think we're ready for a real assessment of the value of this right now, because 10 years ago, not many faculty members were doing it. Now they are. Now's the time to say, is it really of value? But I do bring, this is one from the Academy of Sciences, and the question that they've used, the same one. Researchers have too much pressure to develop marketable products. And you can see that has gone up to almost half the scientists in this survey. They're not all biomedical scientists, believe there was too much pressure. And I point this out because I think this is, again, this is a Canadian study about how the public understands the commercialization mission of the university. And so these were 1,000 individuals, and they couldn't respond to the survey unless they had done a whole online education about understanding it, right? So these were people that had figured, knew something about it. They all saw the benefits of more rapid practical application with moderate concern of conflicts of interest. So they thought it could work. But I think the next one is the most important statement. There is significant concern if universities' research activity was driven more by the potential for profit than the importance of the problem. And I've seen this, you saw I've done some behavioral work, okay? Behavioral, we know there are behavior interventions that can improve outcomes, and they don't get implemented. And then all of a sudden somebody decides they're going to develop an app that they can commercialize that's going to develop behavior, and now they get all worked up in terms of the activity because the problem was there, so I just worry that we don't want, if we are chasing after interventions that have a profit that are not necessarily the most important ones, that's where we're going to lose the confidence of the public, and we need to be careful with that. So I would just say, I believe this is the time that we need to start surveying or assessing for faculty that are involved in it and not involved in it, to see if where they think we are on the pathway. Are we doing it too much, too little? Should we do a better job of deciding, where we should push commercialization? And any of you that have followed any of the Memorial Sloan Kettering work about use of data, understand the issues that come up. Just to put it, if you haven't looked at that, the one thing, an exclusive license and the faculty members' data that was being used to be commercialized, but they were not allowed to be part of the deal, that's where you get a lot of conflicts within a faculty. So, engagement of community patients and clinicians, right? All the real customers of research that we need to do there. They're helpful in problem identification. They support successful conduct of the study. They can help in analysis of the data. Very helpful in communication of results and dissemination. And at this time, I think we need to consider them as essential partners, and just it makes good sense in terms of trying to develop successful interventions to engage them. And I think I was just talking with Dan Mullins, the others, we want to figure out how the ICTR can make it easier for the large number of research teams in our academic centers to engage with patients in a way that doesn't require all their own effort to get there. So for us, we have a community research advisory council that we've used for some time. They provide consultancy to teams. They train new partners to embed in research teams, and they provide input on key institutional research policies, which I think has been helpful. I do want to mention, so this research participant satisfaction assessment, I won't go into all the details, but, as the vice dean, I always was trying to figure out, well, where are we? Because you can hear really good stories and you can hear really bad stories every day. And so I never knew, are people in research studies satisfied with their experience or not? So we have started doing an assessment every 6 months of 500 patients that are in an active phase of a research project. We survey them and we display the results on our website that's available to the public and the patients, and we make sure we send the results of this survey back to anybody that was in the sample. And I'll just give you some of the overall to make you feel much better if you do research, because you probably would have similar. Look at, so 92% said they would recommend joining a research study to their family or friends. On a 10-point scale, their average is about 8.6. Were you told what to expect during the study? Almost 100%. Did the information and discussion you had before participating in the research study prepare you for your experience in the study? Exceptionally good. Any of you that serve on the IRB, it makes me feel a whole lot better. Okay, we got our problems, but this makes us think that we are doing a good job. If you look at, this is satisfaction with research team members, and it goes, the yellow is always. So the research team members listened carefully to me, like 80% always, treated me with respect, 92%, pressured me to join the study or stay in the study. That's the opposite direction, thankfully. I knew how to reach the team, and then the one that we're really this is now a goal for JHM, which is felt I was a value partner. And you can see we're about 58% on this. We've gone up to about 62 or 64%. So I think we should all feel better, assuming your data is similar, to try to look at it, that when we encourage a patient to join a research study, while they may start out saying, I feel like I'm a guinea pig, I think at the end of it, we can say you're going to have a good experience. But I don't point it, it's not all great. So what would be important for participants in a future study, and you look at those 2 bars at the end, summary of overall research results shared with me, and results of personal lab tests shared with me or my doctor. Both of those are important, and you all know we do not universally share research results with patients that are in our study. We do it intermittently, and I know there are some issues about how to do it, but at the end of the day, I always say it this way, if a participant only goes in one study and they don't do a repeat study, we're going to have a problem, because we're not going to have enough patients. So they're telling us, if you want us to continue, give us back the results. And then there's also frequently now more concerns about the money involved and their out-of-pocket costs for usual care components in a research study that are very difficult for us to address clearly. But I can tell you, out of 500, every 6 months there's about 3 or 4 handwritten comment about, I didn't understand what I was going to have to pay as being part of this study. I bring out the Henrietta Lacks as an example also about engagement, where sometimes we shouldn't be afraid of dealing with controversial issues. This was not one of the easiest issues for Johns Hopkins, but I have spent 10 years engaging with the Lacks family and trying to move them to think about it in a different way. And this last October, or last month, we had 1,000 people at our Henrietta Lacks conference. Francis Collins gave a great address, and we announced that we're going to build a Henrietta Lacks Hall for patient and community interaction. So I guess I would just say, because a lot of people said, you guys are crazy. Why do you keep bringing up Henrietta Lacks? Just let it go. And right? And we said, no, what you want to do is you want to take a story that engages the public and try to turn it into a way that'll advance their understanding. And then this focus on efficiency and quality. It has to be, part of the process. De-risking early therapeutic development, and NCATS is involved in this. Tissue on a chip, where you might look at toxicity pre-human, phase 0 testing. certainly reducing time for study startup. We are working on this E2E approach, which is trying to say, when you have a trial going in the efficacy mode, before you kind of disband the whole thing, move right to effectiveness, broaden your patient eligibility criteria, broaden your training, and see if we can narrow the time between that efficacy and real world settings. And most important is to incorporate measurement of the process of translation into that learning health system. So we begin to say, how long does it take to actually start a study? How long does it take to get an IND filed? Just making sure we're conscious of it. So, so those are a little bit of the steps. You can read this. This is the mission for our ICTR, and I hope it will be the same for University of Maryland. I think if you look at it, it's a broad mission, right? But I've told you about this. We're thinking broadly about translational research. I do think that last sentence is important, that these interventions we develop must be responsive to the needs of patients and communities and consistent with their values, and trying to make that part of the way we think about each one of our problems. Now, Steve has kind of mentioned we have an application in place, and we've been told that it will be funded. So we're happy that in the spring we should be on a real partnership. But I thought I'd share with you a little bit about how we're organizing the ICTR in the coming months to see how you can look at be a part of it. So the first one is we really are transforming the ICTR into a regional CTSA, which we think is an important part of really moving the community and taking advantage of the expertise. And certainly for UMB, we would look as a partner and say, a broad research portfolio, expertise in different schools. For example, we do not have a school of pharmacy, so one of our optional sections, that we were allowed one optional section, it is going to be on drug development, taking what we're doing in the Johns Hopkins and pairing it with the School of Pharmacy at the University of Maryland. Social work, legal, really making people think broadly, and we saw advantages with that. The other one is, our goal is still to improve the health of the community and the state. And between the two of us, our two health systems, we probably cover 60 to 65% of the hospital admissions and the encounters. And if our two health systems could get on the same page in terms of what we're trying to do with research or taking research into health transformation, we would have a very good opportunity to change the health of the whole state of Maryland. And so we're looking for those type of big ideas to try to do that. And again, we're partnering with Kaiser on learning health system as well, Kaiser Mid-Atlantic. So we fund a series of pilots for them around healthcare, the learning healthcare system. And Morgan State is going to bring us, again, some training opportunities that they have access to more training opportunities in healthcare systems than they would at their own university. Now, this was the other one I did want to, we're going to focus on how to enhance the conduct of clinical trials. And, we were trying to find something that, that would bring us together but still have an impact. And I think it goes something like this. We're trying to figure out, well, how do we deal with the new precision medicine platform when it comes to clinical trials? Smaller and smaller patient groups, looking at subsegments of who responds or not. And then I think we want to take an honest look at some of the more innovative clinical trial designs, which frankly, adaptive clinical trials, basket designs, I think you see it some in the cancer field, some in mental health, but the vast majority of the NIH clinical trials are pretty standard. They have not adapted these new methodologies, maybe for very good reasons, we're not sure. But our approach is to say, well, let's take these clinical trials, bring our best methodologists in this area, see if we can, make an assessment and decide whether, these are underutilized methodologies or we need new approaches still. And then while I'm not really talking much about training, our training programs, there is a K and a T program in those. I want you to know that it is important for us, that many people think that the at-risk clinical investigator is probably the biggest threat to research in the next 10 to 20 years. We're just not going to have people that are comfortable and deciding to go in that space. And so we have a very comprehensive training program to try to make sure that that we do have the right workforce, and that workforce is competent in the areas I told you about: team science, bioinformatics, commercialization. So this is the components, and we're not going to go through each of these, but just to give you an idea, where you can see we have a community and collaboration, drug discovery and development, this hub capacity, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that because we are creating a clinical trials network. There's a huge impact on informatics, and then this BIRD, which is the biostatistical support, is still our most widely used service at Hopkins. I think we do about 380 consultations a year, and is the missing aspect for many researchers. And these are a few of some of the successful programs that we've supported by the ICTR and will continue to be supported. One, continued wide use of our clinical research units. We realize we've had to move more to a full cost recovery. We've moved our inpatient to a domiciliary unit, which is the only thing that's sort of affordable. And we've known that we have to partner with other organizations. So NIDA Intramural no longer has a clinical research unit. They use ours, and that's because these are pretty expensive and valued components, and we have to look for partners around the area. I mentioned the biostatistics consultation. I remember this pilot funding that we use, which again is maybe a little bit different than others. It's a fairly large amount of money, and we try to say, we are interested in translation. You can use that money any way you want. If you have to go outside of Hopkins to do it, we'll support it. We'll do the subcontract. You need a prototype with a company. We had a subcontract with your dental school here on an oral antigen study. So that's pretty good. They get that and a project manager, and we find out if they're not successful, if they're not moving after 6 months, we took away their funding, and that sort of stopped that after a while because people realized it. The one thing, and this is where I want to just say what we think is a little different than translational than the standard NIH. For any of you that have done pilots in the NIH, what we usually say is we invested $2 million in pilots and we got $20 million of NIH grants back. And that's nice, but the goal of translation is not another NIH grant. The goal of translation is to improve patients' health and to move forward. And I'll just give you the one quick example because we use this. In drug development, there's this whole notion about, you identify early failures and so you don't waste time. All right, so we have an investigator, we fund him a pilot, it's looking at a target for a schizophrenia drug, it's a total failure, he finds nothing. So in the NIH view, well, that was not a good use of the pilot funds. In the translational point of view, we would say that was a very good use of the funds because we stopped an investigator from going down a pathway that they should move. So this is where that tension about the usual NIH metrics and what we think is more important for translation. And research informatics has definitely grown as part of the CTSA, and you can see this is within our ICTR. We've seen all of those support for researchers to access EPIC data, how to help researchers that need something done in EPIC for their study. Putting in new decision support, BPA. We need a group to do that. We are very active right now in research recruitment through the MyChart patient portal, and we are seeing some success with it, but know that there's got to be a lot of organization around that, and in fact it even means engaging your clinicians, because a patient will get a message, go in and ask the clinician, why are you asking me to join this study? What about it? So if the clinicians aren't on board, it doesn't work either, and that's really where the whole health system has to go. And the Trial Innovation Network is another important, so the goal is to improve the quality and efficiency of multi-center clinical trials. And this is a grant on top of the CTSA. There are 3 trial innovation centers, so we're one with Tufts, and Duke and Vanderbilt is another, and Utah. And there's a recruitment innovation center as well. And what we're open, and any of you here, if you're planning an NIH multi-center clinical trial, you can come to the Trial Innovation Network, and we provide support on design, selecting sites, getting you patient numbers at each of the CTSA sites. We are part of our biggest service right now is the single IRB, so we're single IRB for a lot of studies. So we see this network as the Trial Innovation Network, the RICS, and then the CTSA sites, each one of the 60 sites being active and doing research. And just to give you an idea here, that we've been going for almost 2 years now, but we've had 147 proposals submitted, 64 from 45 different CT institutions. 64 institutions are involved in some component of it, and we're really trying. There's that issue like where you're just a CRO for NIH studies. We hope we're more than that. We're looking for people that are going to partner in innovation, and we can talk about some of the results that we've done at a later point. But you can see here, really, we are meeting our goal of being disease agnostic. You can see almost every NIH institute has been involved right now. The biggest one, obviously, is NHLBI. We even do have a couple from NCI, although that is not our usual audience. And this is some of the work that we've done, initial consultation. Then if you get through a certain criteria, you get a comprehensive consultation. We do recruitment, feasibility assessments, community engagement studios. So we're still looking for business, although that may have changed. I think I was telling we're ready to say this, the new HEAL, the new chronic pain initiative, the NIH pain initiative, they're going to come out with a FOA, and the requirement for the teams is for them to use the Trial Innovation Network for IRB, the clinical center, the data center. So it's going to be an experiment to see if the CTSAs and the Trial Innovation Network can make it easy to get good studies done in pain, which is a good topic because it crosses so many disciplines and areas. And then the last thing I just want to say is we do understand that you need to support all the research team, not just the PIs. We have to support the trainees. We have a very active data managers interest group where all the data managers come. They've developed a best practices manual for data management at Johns Hopkins. We have the biostatisticians that are helpful, and we are now trying to take on the whole research coordinator crowd. I must say I was a little intimidated when I saw the list that there's 1,250 research coordinators that work at Johns Hopkins right now, and that doesn't include the School of Public Health. So how we're going to organize that community. But I would step back, and this is where the CTSA is helpful, saying who is looking out for research coordinators, that we've looked at our turnover. It's not good. Our turnover is 12 or 13% per year. If you have a 5-year study, that almost means you have a 50% chance that you're going to have a turnover in research coordinator. That can be a huge problem for a study. And when we talk about clinicaltrial.gov reporting, all those, when you have a turnover of staff, it just makes the whole process more complex. So that is another part of what we see the CTSA is looking at the whole research community. So what are the next steps? I want you all to think big. How can Hopkins and University of Maryland work together to improve the health of Baltimore and the Maryland region? I think we're ready to take on a problem that we could bring all of this expertise together that would really be interesting to see what it is. Obviously the opiate crisis is out there, and there's a group that may come together for one of the large statewide grants, and that's certainly, I think, a topic area, but there may be others. I do think translational research is difficult but rewarding. I always put that difficult. I mean, drug companies can't pick the right drug all the time, right? So you have to imagine, if translational research was so easy, we wouldn't be, in the state we are now. You got to get used to failure, and as part of that, and so for our trainees, I've developed a whole session on resiliency, personal resiliency, which is just as important. How do you deal with failure? Because it is the life of a translational researcher. How do you create and nurture that research team? Again, how do you engage with patients, clinicians, and other stakeholders? And I challenge you to ask Steve and I both, the ICTR, to help address the most important barriers to translational research at your institution. Not just, this is not one unit at a time. We're trying to say, do you have a general problem that you think everyone is facing, and if we provided a solution, we could broadly benefit the translational research teams. That's the type of problem that we're looking for and would love to work with you on. So with that, again, welcome to the CTSA program, and we'll be working together, I think, intensely over the next few years.
Thank you, Dan. That was a wonderful presentation. And those of us in the ICTR ICTA, it's like deja vu all over again. I think we really are on the same page. Questions, comments?
I was just wondering where perhaps you saw the role of, been hearing a lot about implementation science, and that can't really sort of be ignored with translational science. So in terms of their partners, they're really one and the same, or how do you view that component?
Yeah, so her question is about implementation science. And, I do think that implementation science is obviously part of this. Now, you may have seen some of these figures that have T1, T2, T3, T4. It really breaks it down, and maybe too many steps. But in fact, the CTSA program just sent out an email to all the PIs that said, tell us what you're doing in dissemination and implementation research. So we do think it's part of it. And, again, this is where you have to have that translational mindset that says, when we're working with effectiveness, how is it simple enough that intervention is going to be broadly implemented? And that's where the health system has to come in. We should be great partners between what we know in the research and what we know in the health system. And we should be, we all are big enough systems now that implementation research is directly relevant because we have multiple hospitals, multiple clinics, multiple areas. So I think we are the ones that should take the lead on pre-planning around dissemination and implementation science, and we do support some of that, and we'd be happy to talk to you more.
So Dan, if NCATS gave you one time $50 million to spend in 2 years, what would be your top 3 projects that you would attack?
So $50 million. I think what I would probably do is have some process to identify 5 promising research teams that had identified a good problem, had some research experience, but were not what I would call a mature center. We would work with them to identify the best research team, bringing in all the stakeholders early in the process. We would take some of the trainees that we have, the KL2 and others, bring them right into that, because we still have to find this way to model the best team science that is available. Each one of our institutions has a few groups that do it very well. It's the minority though. And then we would build them, give them the informatics support that they need to do that. I think the other one is try to expose them to these broader concepts early on in the process, so that they wouldn't be so conservative about saying, I don't want to do anything risky. I want to go down the same platform. You talk to, new trial designs, pragmatic designs. What can you do with existing data, informatics, and then just give them what I would say the full support by trained research coordinator, and see if we gave them all the support they needed, could they get to that translational goal? That's what I would do. I was saying, we talked a little bit before, is one of the visions I had, and it didn't really work well, but it was partly my own fault, is the idea early that the ICTR would be like an incubator for a team, right? Because you can't put every team in the ICTR. We know, right? We'll eventually run out of resources and time. But it would be this notion is, you're a good group, you're starting, you don't have it all, we will support you for 3 years, and then goodbye. Then you've gotta work out your own administrative structure, your own training. And if we did this over multiple years, that's how I think so this idea about the ICTR as an incubator, and then teams get a better sense of how to be effective translation, and then they're off on their own and their disease specific components.
Thank you. That was a wonderful talk. You made it a big emphasis, I felt like, or at least I perceived it as an emphasis on team science that includes all relevant stakeholders, including clinicians. And I thought that was very important because from most of our experiences, there seems to be a perception of dichotomy of here's the clinical people and here are the researchers, where in fact, I think the best research are those that involve both. So from your administrative perspective, how are you kind of trying to ensure that those two worlds are forced to meet as part of a successful research application?
Yeah. So she's talking about how to make sure clinicians have a role in the research team. I definitely recognize the problem. In fact, when I'll tell the non-clinicians, I'll say, because I'm afraid this is what happens, right? You have a research team, and they talk to a clinician for 1 or 2 hours. The clinician downloads a huge amount of information. That's extremely helpful in terms of developing the pathway forward, what subgroups of patients may respond or not. And then the clinician is gone. Then the research team goes off on their own. They don't continue to engage with the clinician, and the clinician gets no credit for that activity. And so part of that's where we're talking about what is the good culture of a team, and how do you do that, and how do you value everybody's contribution. I will say on the other side, there's a strong belief right now that one of the things that is really preventing the successful conduct of studies is clinicians have no interest in participating or referring patients. And that has gone down. And in fact, for those of you on the leadership side, we've been talking in a couple forums that somehow people that run academic health systems believe that all the physicians that work for them, of course, are interested in research, and it's sort of like providing them some data that says, what, this clinician, and they get all their bonuses about RVUs and not about participating, and it's become much harder for them to partially participate in clinical research than not. I will say, I have to just give one example though, which is kind of funny. So we have this Johns Hopkins Clinical Research Network. So that includes Anne Arundel, Inova, Peninsula Hospital on the Eastern Shore, Reading Hospital in Pennsylvania, and Allegheny. So we keep talking about this and how to get clinicians more involved in referring patients into clinical trials. And we talk, and then one time the Peninsula General Group comes and says, yeah, we're thinking about that. So what we decided is for all the physicians that are employed, they all get a bonus based on the number of patients that are enrolled in a clinical trial. Not one-to-one, but as a group, they get a bonus if they, and clinical trial enrollment went way up. I said, we think about that forever in the academic. I don't think we can do it. This small place got it done in a year. And it's exactly what you really want to do, right? We don't want anything that says, here's $50, Mark, for sending me a patient, right? We don't want that. But if you generalize it, it's perfectly fine to do it. And it is helpful. So I think there's a lot of group, I can tell you, Rob Califf from the FDA, the Duke, there's a small group trying to come up with some solutions, and we're a little bit stuck at the moment. So if you have any ideas, let us know.
I agree. I think that's the existential threat for clinical research at an academic medical center. CROs seem to survive. Actually, docs in the community also can survive and make a decent margin, but it's a threat to us, absolutely. Any other questions? All right, well, let's thank Dr. Ford again.
Yes, she's right. Yes. It was actually the UVA.
That's what they said is the biggest.
Yes. First of all, I got entered.
So I put I actually, you can see some of the, there, I did reference it, but I don't, the journal, but I didn't give you the one. So I can give you that, but if you look.
I think neither. I think that, well,
Health expectations.
numbers have to have the match that to an idea of the central trials.
So I have to see whether she made the same error. It wasn't error. Because they had to write down the ID number.
I don't think I knew.
Create some.
And she carry over to her, but I will share those because that's right.